Winter motorcycling was once like summer motorcycling, a frequent activity, only colder and damper. The hobby motorcycling of retirement sees me more selective in my choice of riding days. Yes, I was out in the mud of October on the 1939 Red Panther, and briefly behind the screen and leg shields of an aerial leader, blowing away Christmas cobwebs. But I'm more likely to put a heater on and get busy in the workshop. The bike's disturbed only by an occasional application of the battery charger. And then bliss. April arrives. The sun is out. Sap is rising, and there's a Panther meeting to attend. The Model 35 ES is the perfect lightweight to ease me into a New Year's riding. A 250cc two-stroke twin with the heart of a giant. I check my little book for anything which I should tackle before it results in a gutter workshop, and I'm shocked to see that the mileage logged on this bike last year was 0. But enough jabbering. This is addiction. I'm going cold turkey, and I need a fix. For a mile or two I feel like a plug which doesn't quite fit its socket. My armchair-shaped backside craves comforts which are, frankly, unavailable. My working parts are in poor alignment with the controls. I try for third gear, hooking up with the toe of my boot, and find it waiting below the sole. And then, somewhere along the way, feet and fingers make a direct connection with the controls. No middlemen. The cogs engage, the clutch bites, and the engine sings my favourite song. we have a 140-mile day ahead of us. Sit up straight or you'll fall off. I have no written route, but my mental map has colours which correspond roughly to local, outer local, distant, familiar, and unknown areas. The last doesn't apply today. I'm on familiar ground all the way, following a van here along the River Nene, where a limit of 40 miles an hour applies, with occasional radar speed checks to trap the unwary. I tuck in behind and keep a feather-light hand on the throttle until the way opens up again. Interesting to watch the wake up or you'll go in the river knobs, almost static at 24 frames a second. Motorcycling is a dangerous activity. Make no mistake about that. As a father of teenagers, I was asked more than once, how can you put them at risk so, encouraging your sons to ride motorcycles? But life itself is a dangerous game. The alternative seems to be not being alive, which you may consider completely without risk or entirely life-threatening. Even an everyday task like sweeping a chimney carries an element of danger. Anyone who has been dedicated to two wheels, and I guess that includes most of those present, understands this, that motorcycling has brought colour to my life. Through the town of Ramsey, the Loads of Cakes shop on the left catches my eye. But it's not me that needs topping up before we're too far into the trip. The Panther's pretty jelly mould tank has no reserve supply, save for a smidgen trapped in the bottom of the tapless side. And if I misjudge the range, I will end up pushing. Fitting a reserve tap is a promise made and broken last year, and the year before. Filling a mix in the tank two-stroke may seem like a chore, but back in the olden times where I learnt my craft, it was what we expected. Getting lazy, I once put petrol in first, poured in my measure of SAE 30 oil, and rode away. A small two-stroke may travel as much as half a mile before the carburettor uses its fuel fill and chokes on a diet of neat oil. To avoid this, one must put oil in and let the inrush of petrol mix it, or failing that, put the cap back and give the bike a good shake before you ride. The fully synthetic oil that I now use will distribute itself readily, but old habits die hard.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Bear with me, I'm in anecdotal mood today. Maybe it's riding old familiar ways, close to my youthful home. My mother, knowing her determined son, didn't attempt to dissuade me from having a motorcycle. Instead, she secured Ken, a mechanic at our local garage, as my tutor. Once he was satisfied that I could control a zigzag course around his pipe, Swan Vestus matches and tobacco pouch, we took to the road. I'd follow Ken's Triumph Thunderbird, observing road positioning, hand signals and so on. After a few miles he'd stop and have me ride in front, before flagging me down to deliver his verdict, with a nod or a slap on the wrist as appropriate. It might raise some eyebrows now, but our sessions always finished in a pub with a pint, as he regaled me with stories from his motorcycling past. Riding one night across the misty fens, Ken saw a wobbling red light ahead. Giving the cyclist a wide berth, riding close to the verge on his right, he hit a large, lumpy obstacle and was thrown over the handlebars to land on a heap of sugar beet and an upset trailer, the driver beside it waving a torch. My anecdotes aren't done yet. You don't get off so lightly. To catch the whole 70-mile ride, I change my camera battery before I ride on toward the village of Kingston. I did a spell of private nursing in 1969 at Crossways Cottage, on the left here. If you enjoy diving down rabbit holes, you can read my brief memory on the Farron Hook website. Link below. These roads are rough. In recent years, resurfacing has gone out of vogue, and the repairs of repairs are now awaiting repairs. In places, a man has been round with a can of yellow spray paint, presumably because the road menders can't recognise potholes anymore. Apologies if I give you a nudge occasionally, but we don't want you falling off. The constant jolting is certainly causing me some discomfort. 50 miles out, I pause to water a tree. And restarting, I hear the unmistakable sound of a big piston aero engine, possibly a Rolls-Royce Merlin in a Spitfire. Duxford Aerodrome is only a few miles ahead. Beyond the village of Ickleton and the M11 overpasses, a bridge below the main London rail line links to Great Chesterford, where we lived in the early 1970s. I drove a van for local builders merchants, and one afternoon, my deliveries complete, I skived off for a cuppa with my new wife. Incidentally, the one sometimes seen in the sidecar. Here is the van outside our rented cottage, with my younger brother riding away on his Suzuki Invader. And here is the bridge. Used to passing below on a bike, I failed to take into account a minor discrepancy between the relative heights of van and bridge, the numbers coming out in the van's favour. The roof, being glass fibre, capitulated more readily. No one but me could explain why a leak had developed above the cab. Variety is the spice. Bumpy side roads give way to something smoother, sweeping and less taxing on the spine. We scoot along to Newport before diving onto side roads for the last few miles to our destination in Henham. At the Cock I find Adam and his Triumph Tiger 90 from 1937.
Hiya. Are you here for the Panther group?
I hear that they do meet here, yeah. Been here.
Yeah, today's the day.
Yeah, I came here last year with my dad, I think.
Okay.
This time last year, on his Panther.
It's always pleasing to meet young riders who give the lie to prognostications that no one will want our old bikes when we're gone. Who could have predicted that anyone, no matter their age, would take pleasure in riding this Triumph on public roads nearly 90 years after it left the factory? The 88-year-old Tiger makes my 59-year-old Model 35 seem like a young whippersnapper. We're soon joined by the usual crowd. Steve and Fiona on their Harley outfit, Neil on Model 75 Panther, Gareth on his 2002 Enfield India, which I remember when he bought it. How quickly new bikes grow old. Good company and Nosh set me up for the homeward ride. A quick dual carriageway run, slipstreaming a lorry at a steady 55 miles an hour, put a few miles behind us before a fuel fill, not pushing my luck or my bike. Back in the shed, the 250cc Villiers Panther registered 144 miles and put us back on the road for a new riding year.